Welcome to Kudos AM PM, a podcast exploring the future and impact of design innovation as they intersect with business, art, and technology. I'm your host, John Kudos. Through this podcast, I have an amazing opportunity to connect with creative trailblazers from different time zones in the world. Today, I'm joined with Martin Flores, and I'm really excited to welcome here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, so you are, I'm going to just introduce you now. You call yourself a multifaceted graphic designer.
That's true.
And you dabble with graphic design, illustrations, and third spaces.
I think that's a new one I added to my bio. I get really interested in, in my youth, I had really a lot of fascination with graffiti and street art. And so looking at spaces people don't use that often, which is something graffiti artists use, is something I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. Also in third spaces are places that between work and home. In the US, we've seen a decrease in them over the years. And so that's something I'm also pretty excited to explore more of. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think when we connected, I'm actually really excited because we went to the same college.
Wow.
Yeah. You are my first guest from MICA.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Making everybody proud from MICA.
Yeah, but my years at MICA really dates back. Mm-hmm. The Ellen Lupton was the chair back then.
Yeah.
So it's like a big foray for me into the world of graphic design, right? Mm-hmm. But I want to hear your story about how you ended up in MICA.
Yeah, sure. I started doing graphic design in high school, actually. We had a high school that did majors, and I chose graphic design. It was called commercial art at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for the beginning, and then was trying to figure out where to go to college. So I did industrial design because it was tough to I wanted to go to a bunch of, there was other colleges I looked at for graphic design, but I couldn't afford art school at the time.
Art schools are expensive.
Yeah, they're expensive. And so what I did, I went to an engineering college for industrial design, did that. I realized pretty quickly I wasn't a huge fan of industrial design. It's just very difficult for my brain to think in that specific way.
Where did you go for that program?
I went to NJIT, in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay, that's the New Jersey...
Institute of Technology.
Okay.
Yeah, they were trying to make a MIT version, but in New Jersey.
Well, it's a big school from what I understand.
Yeah, it's gotten bigger.
So you went to NJIT because you're from New Jersey.
Pretty much. In-state colleges are way cheaper in the US. Mm-hmm. And so you just kind of... A lot of people just stick with their state schools pretty much. So I went there for 4 years. I did get a lot of it. A lot of it was just trying to learn things I wasn't comfortable in. Just because I had... My high school experience of graphic design was just oh, I like this. I want to do this idea. And my teachers are okay, go for it. Do that thing. And I'm great. And so industrial design was the first time I had a lot more pushback of just this should be more like this. And I'm oh, okay.
Is it because of technical limitations?
Yeah, it's it was just a different medium altogether. It was almost switching career. I was a kid. I only had 4 years of high school.
Right?
Yeah. So it was switching my brain to that different frequency. Mm-hmm. But then as soon as I graduated, I took a continuing education class at SVA with John Newman. Shout out John Newman.
I know John.
Yeah, he's great. John Newman's great. He comes back into the story later. And I just did that. I worked for a teacher for a bit in the back of a woodshed doing graphic design for him. And then built a portfolio with John's class, started interviewing, got my first job in Fintech, a conference, did event design for a little bit. And then I actually interned at Nickelodeon, and then 3 months there, went to a startup. And then after 2.5 years at the startup, I moved to Nickelodeon, which John actually connected me with people from there.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a giant leap there. You ended up in Nickelodeon.
Yeah, it was, thank God. This is a message to all my students. Reach out to your teachers because they're very helpful.
We have a lot in common because I also teach, and
Yeah.
the that connection, like you would think that you're giving away knowledge, but students in a way, for me,
Yeah.
feeds my energy as well, so
Yeah.
it pushes me to do better in what I'm doing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So long journey, basically.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you ended up in Nickelodeon, and somehow you ended up in MICA as well.
Yeah, there was a pandemic. There were like layoffs at various companies, so Nickelodeon was one of them, unfortunately. And then I was like in a path where like wasn't sure where I was going, and I think like working in the corporate space a lot, I wasn't like you don't always have the time to reflect your own identity or your own style or like discover that.
When you say corporate space, you're referring to the experience at Nickelodeon?
Yeah, I guess a little bit because you have to also. I guess just in general, like sometimes in graphic design, you're pushing so much of what the client wants, and so like if you're not like feeding yourself creatively, you can kind of feel like I kind of felt like I was losing a little bit of authorship of my work, and I wasn't sure what I was like doing all the time. And also, I didn't have the graphic design experience of like a university, only industrial design. And so I wanted to experience more of that and like find community and like honestly get like a better sense of work or a better sense of a look at my work of like how it appeared to other people. And so I started applying to colleges, and then MICA popped up, like in the research. Also, like one person, Katy Huertas, actually interned at Nickelodeon over the summer, and then I found out she was going to MICA, so we talked a little bit about her experience there. She like recommended it, so I looked into it, and yeah, lo and behold, ended up at MICA.
I was speaking to someone at MICA about, is there anyone interesting I should talk to? And your name popped up.
That's nice.
And I think this is one of the reasons, right? So we're looking at, what do we even call this? An installation, a pop-up installation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to talk a bit about more?
Yeah, this is the work behind me is pieces from my thesis. So in the graduate program at MICA for graphic design, it's a 2-year program, the Masters of Fine Arts. The second year is all focused on your thesis. So you're like working on it the whole 2 semesters. And my project centered around liminality, which a lot of people don't understand what that is. And so I
think you have to explain that.
Explaining it. So like, I guess for the audience and for John, if you can think of a time, you don't have to tell me, but like, if you can think of a time where like you realized like things really shifted dramatically for you, or they felt that you like lost a sense of self. That's what liminality is about. The term comes from anthropology, the anthropology world, and these 2 like researchers came up with it. I think Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner are the big names in that field for this. And they noticed in like rites of passage when people like, we all have rites of passage in our lives, right? We have like birthdays, weddings, divorces, graduations. And there are these moments where like you shift from one identity to the other. But in between that, you like there's a void of your self, essentially. Like you lose, your old self dies, but your new self isn't there yet. And that space of emptiness, that vacuum is like liminality. That's where like it exists. And for a lot of people, including myself, I felt like a loss of like, it was terrifying, like those moments, because you're like, I don't actually know what I'm doing right now. And some people just like wait it out, because that's what like liminal spaces are, of just like, it's a hallway, or it's like, I'm waiting in the subway. These are spaces where we're just like taking up time, and we're like, oh, well, just waiting for the next thing. But like, I realized that like in my research and in doing this project that like, there's such moments of like freedom and like power in that, of like, oh, you can actually do anything you want, because you can choose your next direction. And that's why it's terrifying, because of the freedom of choice in that.
Was the school experience your liminality moment?
Okay, so the other thing I found out about liminality is that you're always, like in my personal experience, I'm always going through some sort of liminal space or liminal experience. I mean, sometimes there's, spots where you like rest or whatever. But like school for sure was one. In my thesis book, actually, we have to make a thesis book for MICA for the.
It looks amazing.
Thank you. My essay, we have to write a thesis essay. In my thesis essay, I explain how like I actually was hit by a car on my bike when I was living in Brooklyn. I was on my bike and I got hit by a car. I was fine, by the way. I didn't thank God. But like I didn't break any bones. I was just really bruised and banged up. But like it started this thought in me that like, oh, I don't like how I've been living. I was just like very much like sort of following the rules of a lot of things. I was just mostly listening to what other people thought and like going along with the flow and not really like sticking out or sticking up for myself in terms of like I wasn't doing that many personal projects. I wasn't like finishing like a lot of personal work, and I was just like sort of trying to like survive, but like not really thrive in the city. And so that like was this sort of wake up call of like, oh, like the old me, like it was sort of an event of like before bike hit and after bike hit of just like of like the death of me like it was sort of a death of innocence of like, oh, like it was like,
it's like a wake up call.
It was a wake up call. It's like you're going to die. Like, and this was like this, you know, God forbid, but like this bike thing was like a like, hey, like death comes at unexpected moments. So like wake up and like do something. I was like, okay. So then like, you know, moments like that. I don't know if you've had similar experiences.
Of course, yes. I think, you know, as an immigrant, right, I went to MICA, actually, as a complete stranger. There was my first culture exposure to America, you know, and I ended up in Baltimore, which is, of all places, you know.
Sure.
But yeah, I think for me, that was a moment. And also, of course, you know, there's a lot of dramas around not just culture shock for me, but it was also the possibility of having to go home the year after I enrolled, because there was a huge economic crisis at that time. So it was more like this could all have been taken away from me, right? And then I had to figure out ways to, how can I stay? What can I do now, you know?
Yeah.
And that's, I think what you described earlier is like you really think about what choices you could make.
Yeah.
Or some people don't do anything, right?
Sure.
And then let things kind of unveil, right? But for me, I had to make a lot of choices around that time, and there was, I always refer back to that time as like my growth. Basically, I kind of discovered myself, or like, oh, I didn't know I can do this.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, coming out. Are you referring to like post-liminality, you know, like there's different phases of it, right?
Yeah.
Like I think for me, yes, I do go through a lot of phases like that. And every step of the way, to me, it's always about how do I, you know, figure this out.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not always a problem, but it's always like a moment where I really have to contemplate on like, if I don't do anything, this could have happened.
Yeah.
So I should do something about this.
Yeah, I don't know if you find this, but I always find that like in my work at least that like action is better than like inaction and like overthinking. I think that was like a big part of my thesis of like thinking by doing, and like, oh, doing something will give me a result I can think about instead of just like trying to think my way out of situations.
Yeah. So how did that actually ended up, you know, looking like this? Or the thesis book?
Yeah. Early in MICA, I started making like flyers and putting them around campus to like as like jokes. I have like a sort of humor, pranky sensibility with my work.
I think we all need some humor in our work, right?
Yeah. But like I've had teachers tell me before in like the past that like I had once teacher sit me down and was like, I love your work. You're funny, but that's an issue for a lot of clients because like not everybody wants.
They say specifically.
Well,
clients.
the clients is like he basically sent me down and was like, it's going to be difficult for you to find your place to fit in, and he's like kind of right because like the things I wanted to do are like super like pranky and like I guess just different than like a lot of things because like I understood what he meant, but like it really resonated with me. It was like okay, like it's going to just take you a lot longer to find out where you fit, but once you get there, you'll be pretty happy about it. And I think that happens with a lot of people who have like a specific like sensibility about things. And so like at MICA, I would just start like I was like, okay, like this is a new environment. How would I fit in? I'm thinking about like graphic design, graffiti, street art. And so I started making like these flyers that were based off of like, are you familiar with Discordianism at all?
No.
Okay. There were these groups of like pranksters in the past who like were like an offshoot of like surrealists and situationists. And so they would just like make these really weird like happenings. And one of the things that came out of it, people still, I guess, sort of observe it, but like I had this PDF of flyers but they were all like strange. They were like house for sale, and then it had a picture of a dog, and then it had the lyrics for the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And so they were just like really absurdist, like stuff like that. Or it said like, Goblin Quartet needs conductor. We're a bunch of goblins and we need somebody to lead our band. And then another flyer that says, I'm a conductor looking for a band of goblins. So you'd be like, okay. And so I started making things that were related to that. And they were like, it would said like it was a picture of a sandwich and it said lost sandwich. And then it said underneath, has anyone seen my sandwich? I worked really hard on it. I'm so hungry. So I started doing like silly things like that.
Uh-huh.
And then, like when the semester for your second year starts, you start working on your thesis. I did a couple experiments in the summer about things I wanted to work at. Mm-hmm. And Ellen and Abe, who were professors at the time for thesis, they gave us a reading about trees communicating. And one of the quotes stuck out to me. And so I like built a mini installation out of it. It was like a mini version of this. So it was like a bunch of like arrows pointing into an eye. And then the eye in the center had like a little pull-out tab where you can read the quote. Mm-hmm. I forgot what the quote says. It's in here. Let's see if we can find it really quickly. So it says, other worlds are not only possible, they're already present. And so I became interested in this idea of another world. Like I really liked the work from Meow Wolf, this like sort of museum factory that makes like interactive museums that you walk through, and it's like a supermarket turns into like a really surrealist like art alien exhibit. Mm-hmm. And so like I wanted to make a separate world, like something that was off the beaten path to take people off like their normal going abouts. And so it started with that, and then we had a workshop that like followed it up with that, and I was like, oh, like there was a stairwell that everyone passed by, but like a friend of mine told me about that he was using to get between floors. It's a fire escape. And so he was like, oh, you can just use this. And I was like, oh. So then I did like for that workshop, I did the installation in there, and it started from that. And it was in black and white just to like speed up the process. Like I didn't have to think about colors too much. And it was only using Interstate because the font typeface Interstate. Just because like my background in like street art, graffiti, and like culture jamming, which is like when you take, and if people don't know what culture jamming is, it's when you take a piece of media from the outside world and like you sort of arrange it in a way to like say something. It's like basically you're doing parody work. And I was using that to just to like sort of have a voice of God, because Interstate's like used as like traffic signals and it's very authoritarian. And I was like,
right.
All right, what if you just like made it say the word shit? Is that funny? Like it becomes instantly like sort of like there's already a joke there in a way of like you're taking something serious and you're making it silly instantly. Yeah. So that's kind of how it started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess now I'm starting to understand where these icons and illustrations come from.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There was a lot of like inspiration from like artists like Jeff McFetridge, who like does this sort of like message based. He's an illustrator and he does like this like message based work of like he'll draw like I don't know a keyhole and then he'll say something underneath it. And I was like, oh, I should start doing stuff like that. And just like this is a way to like filter through ideas really quickly, of like having type and like image, type image, type image. Yeah.
Yeah. So Interstate is obviously the font of choice for this, right?
Yeah.
And I think it makes perfect sense. Now, I think with your the larger body of work that you have, I feel like there's different aesthetics all around, you know? So I don't know, maybe I would say, you know, maybe your background in graffiti, street art, maybe there's a sense of remixing things in the quality of your work, you know? Can you talk a bit about where you get your inspirations?
Oh man, I think it just comes from a lot of places. I think in doing my thesis, I realized we had, like early on, we had to like make a little like spreadsheet or like a graph of like, oh, like what are we inspired by as kids? Something early on that affected me a lot was the band Gorillaz. They had a website where you can go through their studio. Like it was like a click-through space where you're like, oh, here's the lobby. Take the elevator up, and then like you could like go to their kitchen and like open up the fridge, and it's like a severed foot in a jar or something. Like it was really goofy and like really like grotesque, but I loved it as a kid. I was like, this is amazing. And so like a lot of my inspiration comes from like like early cartoons, Gorillaz, music, graffiti, street art. I was a big like Juxtapose kid, Juxtapose magazine. Wooster Collective was a good street art blog at the time that came out after like 9/11. Was huge for me. A lot of like the websites I would spend my time on like early internet, just looking for like street art blogs or graffiti blogs and like message boards, and like learning how to do like stencil art on there. Like it was all hand done. I'm like really good with my X-Acto blade now, just because like not only from like cutting all this out, but like also just like making stencils in high school of like finding different vellum like grades and thicknesses and like cutting them out and stuff.
You didn't know about that you were going to get really good with X-Acto blades, right? For doing street art.
No. Yeah, no one tells you about the little things about what you can learn in street art.
Yeah. Okay, I was flipping through your thesis book, and I thought I saw a certificate, like for improv comedy.
Yeah, I took a.
What is that?
When I was living in Brooklyn, I went through like a breakup that like really confused me, and I was like caught off guard by it, and I was like trying to get over it. So like it was another one of those moments of like I've got to stop like living for other people and start living for myself. And a friend of mine was taking improv comedy classes at the time, and I was like, you know what, I like things that are funny. I sometimes think I can be really funny. So let me like maybe I'm good at this. Like throw my hat into the ring. I didn't even like improv comedy at the time. I was more of I liked stand up more, and I was like, oh, we'll see. And I started taking improv classes at UCB, which is there's like a improv theater in New York where it started by like Amy Poehler and some of her friends.
Wow.
And a lot of like SNL people go through there. I think Tina Fey went through there and Rachel Dratch. And so I remember my first like day of class, I was just like mortified. I was like, I'm not an extroverted person. I'm socially anxious. This is not for me. Like, what am I doing? And I was like, okay, I can leave and get a refund of 90% of my money if I leave right now before class starts. 'Cause like those classes are always filled with like such theatrical actors. They always come in, they're like, hello, I've arrived. Right, and I'm just like, oh no.
What am I doing here?
I'm surrounded by people who like are meant for the stage, and I'm just like I'm like a nervous guy, like sinking lower in my seat every time somebody walks in, and it's just like, I'm here. They say there's two types of people in the world: the people who say, here I am, and the people who say, oh, there you are. And I felt like such a there you are person at the time, and I was like, oh no, I'm like a graphic designer. I like do the thing for the person, but like, so like the class starts, and I'm like, all right, when there's a bathroom break, I'm gonna leave class, and I'm not coming back.
You're scheming.
I'm scheming. I'm like, all right, like, ooh, how am I gonna leave? I can't wait for the subway ride home. And then, then I just kept going to class. And then four semesters later, I have a degree.
4 semesters?
Yeah, 4 semesters later, I have a degree for improv. That's on my wall. It's one of the degrees I'm proudest of, next to MICA. But like, I'm more proud of my improv degree that I did for fun than my undergrad degree. Just because it was so uncomfortable. And it took so much also like learned a lot about myself and like made a lot of friends. I'm still friends with them now. A lot of people in my classes.
It's so funny because I'm just kind of drawing connection to, something like why I do things sometimes. And even why I started this podcast, I because it's something that I'm not comfortable doing.
Sure.
You can't tell about that now, but it's something that intrigues me. And I always feel like maybe I could be good at that. And I think you're probably thinking about that in the beginning, and then you were totally freaked out when the whole thing started.
Yeah.
But I feel like talking about liminality, the different phases, right? I
Sure.
mean, it's in a way there's like a logic or like a process that you have to go through, right? To like, I'm afraid of something, or
Yeah.
like, I mean, intimidated by something. Maybe I should try it.
Yeah. That was one of the quotes they told us in improv, actually. They were like, I think it might have been by the guy who started the program or started the style of improv we were studying. And it said, like, fear is the way. And it's like, your fear is a compass. It even tells you that, like, if there's a bear, you're like, okay, I need to get out of here. But usually if it's like, in our modern society, we're not like we're not overrun with bears. So mostly we're afraid of things that like would actually be good for us. So like I was afraid of like improv, and then it was like, oh, this is like super rewarding, but not in a way like I'm always enjoying. Yeah, and I think I felt the same way about teaching. I don't know if you had like any experiences when you first started teaching. Like I was super
Of course,
anxious.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I spent nights just preparing for as much as I could, and of course, the first days is like a mess.
Yeah. I think I'm always surprised by like what my students bring in to the class versus like what I have prepared. I have like these plans, like super huge, like ideas of like, and they're like, okay, like, but I need this thing from you, and I'm like,
Right.
all right, I guess we're scrapping that and we're focusing on the now. And I think that's what was a great thing about improv, and I'm sure you're figuring out this with the podcast of like how much to focus on the present moment. Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think with something else comes up, and I think improv. Actually, I don't know because I've never done one.
yeah.
No, you intrigued me though. Maybe I should look into it.
Honestly, highly recommend.
But I think you feed, or you kind of become empowered when you kind of sense the energy from the people around you. It's like improv could be, I guess, on your own, or it could be as a group, right?
Yeah,
And I feel the same way about a school setting.
yeah,
It's like it's not like I go to school to teach. It's actually about me interacting with the students.
yeah,
And in exchange, sometimes, or a lot of times, I will be surprised. Sometimes good, sometimes bad.
Yeah.
And like what comes out of it.
yeah.
So sometimes, it's about the questions you ask, the prompts you give for assignment. Right?
Yeah.
And then so like the surprises is what keeps me going. I guess,
Yeah.
like I always appreciate that.
What's been like one of the most surprising things in your schooling or your education, like teaching experience?
Well, I think I think I don't know how you were as a student, but I was one of those hard worker. I was just like come up with a lot of ideas. And that's always pleasant. When I go into a classroom and I see the students going beyond what's being asked, right?
Yeah.
But of course, like it's that interaction, right? You're giving them guidance as an instructor, but at the same time, you're also learning from them.
Yeah, I've actually had like I do enjoy that a lot. I've had some of my students like really impress me, and I'm like, oh my god, if I was this good when I was your age, I'd be like in a whole different like world.
And also, the tools are different, right?
Yeah.
Like you can do things a lot faster nowadays.
Yeah, even just like I remember I started with CS3, the Adobe suite, and like
I started with Quark Express.
Okay.
You probably don't know that.
No, I had to like sort of like teach myself Quark for a competition I was doing.
Oh gosh.
And so like, but like I didn't get that far into it because they were like, oh, you can use Quark or InDesign. I was like, I'm just going to use InDesign because that's what I knew. Yeah, but yeah, I remember Quark. But yeah, no, I think so. Also, what surprised me, like, I was such like a studious but like really aggressively like nerdy student about like. Because I was just like, I have to impress the teacher, and then I have to do a good job, and like that was sort of my thing. But then like when I got to teaching, you deal with students who don't do work, or like who are very trepidatious in their work, and like I had to start being like, okay, how do I build them up, or how do I pull like their best selves out of themselves? And that's been like a really interesting and exciting like exercise for myself, because like I don't know, I feel like. What sounds like we were similar students, but like students like us, I guess we always found like we would just react to any prompt, like with like force. But when you have students who are like, oh, I don't know, I'm like either I'm not good at this or like I'm too cool for this. It's like, how do you like bring them in? And I think that's something that also came out of improv a little bit. Yeah.
So what I think is interesting in this topic is instead of staying still or like being unsure about how to react to a prompt or a situation, I think you just pick a path and just go. Right?
That's
And that will lead you somewhere. And I think in in a learning setting, improv or art school, right? I think it's the trying and the failing that you learn the most from.
Oh yeah. No, yeah. I was a big thing of like learning by doing and like figuring out. I had like so many paths when I started my thesis. Until I had like 5 or 6. I think like Ellen got sort of tired. Like maybe not tired, but like I would come in every like class meeting with her and be like, all right, here's my like 6 ideas I'm working on. She's like, okay, cool. Expand on all of them. I was like, okay.
On all of them?
Yeah, kind of just like what, like just go whatever path you want. Like, you know, just like figure it out. Because like the first semester is a lot about like expanding and exploring. And then like second semester is like, all right, like how do you bring this all together? How do you make this work? And so it was a lot of like, oh man, this like ties into the flow of improv. And I noticed the flow of like creativity is really similar in that like, it's kind of like a heartbeat where like, oh, my friend Julie came up with this idea of just like improv comedy and a lot of creation is like a lot like this. Like your heart has to pump by like opening and closing valves. Like that's what a heartbeat is. And you can't just have it do one thing all the time. Like that's how I started to see creativity of like, that's the thing with improv of like, you have for every joke in improv, there's like a setup and a punchline. And so that's also how I saw like creativity later of just like, you have to make something and then like react to it by thinking about it. But you can't just sit back and just think about it because nothing happens. It's like having your heart open and like your blood's just like not going anywhere because it needs to pump. You need to make something, but you can't just keep making things and then not think about it. And so just like for me, it's been that balance of like going back and forth. I don't know if that metaphor makes sense.
It does. I mean, it's very interactive in how you describe it.
Yeah.
Interactivity, you know, like everyone's talking about UX design, right? But interactivity to me is an experience.
Yeah.
And if you start to think outside the format or the boundary of that idea, I think you're doing that maybe unconsciously, you know, like how do you put a prank out there? You know, how do you get people to respond a certain way?
Yeah.
It's a lot more interesting for me.
Yeah.
You know, and it gets people to think, you know, and or even respond in a way that, you know, like changes their mind sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that to me that's fun. It's a fun aspect of your work.
Thanks.
Now, have you considered how fear factors into your body of work?
Oh, I don't know if I think maybe at times. I haven't I think that maybe it's been made me a little bit more trepidatious than I want to be. Like I want to be more, I like really love doing this project. Like, I guess the full scale of the project was that I ended up making like a booth for people to visit in the gallery at MICA. And then there was like, it was sort of like acted as a trailer for the whole project. And this is like, all right, you can step into the booth, have like a picture taken. And then like you can go on your way. But there's a section where you can pick up a card to go to this secret stairwell that's in a different building. And like most people aren't going to go there.
Different
but
building.
Yeah, it's a different building. Like sort of, it's like adjacent. But still, it was like you have to take an elevator to get there. And then you have to like, afterwards you have to get back to the gallery. And so like the people that went there, I heard like that they really experienced this like new thing. So when you get to like this stairwell, it's like covered in wall to wall with like these posters. These are where these are from. And it takes you through the 3 steps of like liminality, where there's like, I label them as pre, intro, and post liminality. And it's like a talk about that. Or did like, it's sort of like a visual essay about that. And like just overlapping and how like this world can seem confusing. Yeah, and like they're black and white because like I think a lot of humans see the world as black and white of like I'm either on or off. But this is like if you like flip through black and white fast enough, it turns gray. And so this is me trying to replicate like this sort of visual gray in a really sort of graphic way. There was a question here, and I completely forgot what it was.
It's the fear.
Oh, about fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think because of finding out that fear is the way from improv, I was like, okay, I have to chase more of these things I'm afraid of. And I think that like, I remember James Victoria talked about this of like,
oh, that makes perfect sense.
If there's he had this thing once, and he mentioned in like a podcast or a video or something, and it was like he like had this idea of like, whenever he like meets with people outside of like client meetings, he's like, oh, you know what really would piss them off? this idea. And I'm just like, my brain was like, shunk, I need to like grapple with this thing. And it's like that's why I like pranks, I think. I'm like, oh, if this thing scares me a little bit, I want to do it. I've had students approach me being like, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea. I'm like, no. This is interesting because like you're afraid of this. And so like, try it, try something you're bad at.
Yeah. Well, that's the best thing about graphic design. I think it's so easy to iterate on ideas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like how long did it take you to make this, right? It's like, I mean, to create the graphics, you probably created a lot, but then you look back, it's like 90% of them are good, right?
Yeah.
So it's just because it's so quick now with the tools that we have. And now with AI even, I'm not even sure how that will factor into the work.
Sure.
Yeah. So what's next for you?
I want to do more projects like this. Like I want to do more build out schemes of this. I am working on a video about this project. I also do want to produce more of these books for sale in the future. Some people
this will be available.
Yeah, in the future. I'm going to be at a couple art book fairs. I think I've already signed up for one. Not selling this yet, but everything else. I have like a bunch of prints I'll be selling. Yeah, and I'm like currently looking for like more interactive experiences. And I think that like some of the things I have in my mind, I have to do them myself. So like, I encourage everybody to follow me on Instagram.
Yes.
Martin.Flores. And so, yeah, I'll be doing more, I think, experimental work in that realm. Probably more like public works, I think. I have like a banner idea I did once.
Public as in public spaces.
In public spaces, yeah. Yeah, and I'm just trying to share more work in general. Because I have a lot of work that has been hidden in my sketchbook that I need to like put out into the world.
I think we all do, actually.
Yeah. I actually I had a project in grad school where we had to like, it's called like biodiagram. We have to make like a data visualization about something personal. And I did like a graph about my projects that I haven't finished. And so they were just like, how long? It was like a timeline of like, this is when it started and it like, the poster was like, I don't know, 6 feet tall. Oh, just like, it was like a couple feet tall, but like, it like ran the gamut of just like, here's a branding project I never finished. Here's this thing I didn't finish. They were like all like various like, yeah, but it was really cool. Yeah, I'm glad I did that. Yeah.
I definitely feel like, in public spaces, this will grab attention. I think the black and white aspect of it, high contrast, it's almost like signage, right?
Yeah.
Or street signs.
Yeah.
But once you start to read into it, I totally get the pranks aspect, the humor, right? Yeah. But also it really makes you think. I really love what you're doing here.
Thanks.
So yeah, I think I want to end on that note that, I think we all need to kind of embrace our fear in a way, right? If you were to challenge students, our audience as your students, right? What would you say?
I would love to offer a challenge where the students find a way to break up the everyday for somebody else. Yeah, that's the assignment. Try to change somebody's every day. Also following it up with the prank definition, like don't abuse, confuse. Like comma.
Don't abuse, confuse.
Don't abuse, comma, confuse. Yeah. I think that's the quality of a good prank.
I have to try that.
Yeah,
I think I'm going to actually take up your challenge and try something.
All right. I look forward to it. Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Martin. You've been an amazing guest, and you showed up early to do this installation.
Yeah.
I don't know if I get to keep them.
You can put on loan. Yeah.
So, all right. So thanks everyone for listening. As you know, in this podcast, we always try to go deep on understanding what drives creativity, and how that actually affects our lives every day. I'm your host, John Kudos, and Martin, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
I think if I see submissions to the challenges, we'll be posting it for you.
Oh, amazing. Looking forward to seeing them. Thanks so much, John.